One request from my side.
Oh, I already started. Yeah, tell me.
No, don't worry. Let's just begin.
Yeah. Okay, welcome guys to Aloron. Today we have the first episode of Alapcharita, which is more like a rendezvous. And I have Pablo with me. Pablo is an internationally acclaimed artist, and he's a wonderful writer. He has worked with great people in Hollywood and European film industry. We were just having a great discussion on capitalism, socialism, and the war which is happening. But amidst this war, also we are looking for peace and art, and we are looking forward towards cinema and audience going back to the theaters again and enjoying cinema in its full potential. So I would tell Pablo to give a short introduction about you, and then we can start about the topic.
Yes, well, hello. I'm extremely happy to be taking part on your initiative. I think it's great to enjoy this possibility that we still have in the world of communicating across the borders in this way. And let's pray that it will continue to be so now that some people around the world are so inclined to telling who is allowed and who is not allowed to transmit news or to
Media coverage, media transmission.
yes, I mean, I'm thinking about the blocking of certain media in Europe, which I think it's a dangerous path.
Mhm.
And that's something that we might comment on later because this talk that we're going to have is related to that as well, you know.
It's more like the polarization of narratives, you can say.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Mm.
So, well, I'm a screenwriter. I come from Chile originally. I'm a poet, and I'm a filmmaker and a lecturer in film. And for some time, you know, by now it's some good 7, 8 years. I've been also working as a teacher and lecturer in film at different film schools around the world, in Europe, in Denmark, in Estonia, in China, and in India, where we met, actually at Huisanwood. Um, and currently, I'm doing research on a topic that is brand new, I dare say, for Europe, and I dare say also probably around the world, also, which is something that I would like to define as digital film theory, or alternatively, digital film scientific theory. But for now, let's narrow it down to digital film theory. So that is
Right.
what I'm doing right now, and that I'm conducting at the Gothenburg University under the excellent guidance of a professor called Anna Roger Backman.
Okay.
So yes,
And
so that
Pablo
is
loves India. I would say Pablo loves India, and he can connect to the roots of India. So it's
yeah,
always great to talk to Pablo about India because he respects India so much and he thinks
yeah.
about India so much, and he has got the essence of India. So, yeah.
Yes, to me, India was one of the greatest experiences in my life, and it's an experience that is only beginning, and that I
Yeah.
wish to also convey to my children and through my children when they grow. And I expect this world crisis to be over,
Yes.
hopefully in a couple of years, and then we'll be able to visit India together. And I wish my children also to know India in the way I do.
And the culture, yeah. Yeah. So we can start our discussion today. Uh, yeah. So what are your views about this digital cinema? Because first we had this analog filmmaking, where we had this 35 millimeter the film and emulsions, and we had that era, and then we came to digital filmmaking, where
Yes,
everybody can become a filmmaker. You can just pick up a camera and you can shoot a film digitally, and
yes,
your cost is low. You just have to buy some storage space, and you can do a lot of post production work in your softwares.
yes,
Then now we are moving towards AR, MR, and VR, which is virtual reality, mixed reality, and augmented reality. So that
yes,
is our exploration of a different kind of space in VR.
yes.
Yeah. So yeah.
Well, my take on this subject is a little bit complicated because I am a trained film theorist. In film theory is essentially a European, you know, branch of philosophical research of the meaning of film that was developed mostly in France, to some extent also in the Soviet Union with Eisenstein and his peers. Um, and of course, there are film theorists that are very important as well in the United States and in other parts of the world. But the whole core of film theory, um, the backbone, was created in Europe, and it is closely intertwined with philosophical schools of thinking. Um, Lacan, also with psychoanalysis, Freud, and so and so. And film theory historically has been looking at certain aspects of filmmaking which are focused more on the aesthetics of film.
Yeah.
But I realized, some years ago, I dare say 6 years ago, when I was in India, actually, that this path of philosophical analysis of filmmaking that's been conducted by film theorists in a very strict manner is not really going to work. It's already been explored. We are confronted to an entirely different medium
Right.
today. And for the first time, perhaps in the history of cinema, first, uh, we are confronting an emergent medium, meaning a medium like film that has qualities that are above its components, meaning that,
Yes.
and also that is composed of an extremely intricate technological body that comprehends everything from simple arithmetics and mathematics, geometry, to quite advanced physical aspects.
Physical
Um,
aspects.
yes. So
And
my
also the metaphysical part of it, I would say.
sorry,
Also the metaphysical part of it.
and that's where exactly digital film theory comes in, because
Yeah.
to me, what is absolutely relevant in order for us to be able to understand how to approach this new medium, which is digital. It is based on an entirely different language than 35 millimeter film was. And with this, I'm not saying, anything negative about 35 millimeter film, because it is still what I love the most.
Yeah.
But I'm just looking
The
at the
depth of it.
scientific part.
Yeah.
Yes, the scientific part, the facts about digital filmmaking. Um, it can't be approached um, artistically if we do not possess, to some extent, some basic knowledge that about these components, and also what it entails in terms of metaphysics, like you say. So what I'm trying to create, what I'm working with, and I have been working with during the last 6-7 years since I was at Beijing Film Academy and Whistling Woods in India, is to create a new cosmology of digital film.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So that is my main objective, and I think, in all honesty and with humility, because there might always be someone else who is working systematically with this. It is not yet known of anyone who is approaching the underlying nature of digital film. It is
Right.
many people are thinking of this, of course, but one thing is to be thinking of these aspects, and another is to be conducting research with the objective of creating a digital film cosmology.
Right. Which is
So,
very interesting. And just talking about the components of film, if we talk about the components, you mentioned Eisenstein. So
yeah,
people who don't know, I must mention that Eisenstein was an engineer. So he was very careful about the components of film. Like when montage was created, It was like looking film from an objective point of view and the components, and then mixing the shots. Pudovkin, if you see Pudovkin or Eisenstein, they worked a lot on this composition of the shots, how
Yeah.
we put it together. Kuleshov did a wonderful experiment.
Right.
So we are talking about the components for a long time. Now in the digital area, we have to think in a different way.
Right. Right. And then it's interesting you mentioned the fact that Eisenstein was an engineer, because, as a matter of fact, I think the filmmakers of the future will all have to be trained engineers,
At least have
and
some knowledge of engineering.
but have advanced knowledge of engineering, because as things are going now, right now, the way in which things are progressing in film, I don't think that there will be directors anymore in the future. They will not be. We will not have cinematographers in the future, because cinematography will be redundant. We will not have editors in the future. We will not have film music composers in the future. And I'm talking about the future not in 5 years, but I'm talking about the future in the next 25 to 75 years, probably 100 years, of course. But still, slowly, we can see that this is the consequence of digital filmmaking, and that the problem of going to train at the film school today is that one is not receiving sufficient training for the problems that one has to tackle as a filmmaker in 5-10 years. So, I mean, there are films that are fully, I mean, of course, you can call yourself a director, like it is happening as we sit here and speak, and you are in charge of a project, but the body of technological knowledge that is working for you is something that exceeds your capabilities to such an extent that if you were to sit down with one of the engineers that is making, oh, sorry, it's my father's watch. So if you were to sit down with one of the engineers that is behind, let's say at Lucasfilm, one of the special effects of the latest Star Wars movie,
Yep. Totally based on mathematics, mostly.
Right. But most directors would not be able to understand what they are talking about. And the problem is, if we go back to the basics of cinema, when cinema was actually produced with celluloid, 35 millimeter celluloid, or 70 millimeter for that matter, is that if a person doesn't have sufficient knowledge about this aspect, I mean, of the components that this director is directing, then I hardly think that we can call ourselves directors, because the director is the person that needs to have most knowledge about all the components in filmmaking.
All the.
And that you have a great example. If we look at Ingrid Bergman, he was known in the Swedish industry, the great Swedish film director, for always being the first to know how to solve a technical problem, not only a problem concerning the direction of the actors, but also the problems concerning the cinematographic aspects, the editing aspects, and so.
Same with Kurosawa. I will just tell you one thing. That same with Kurosawa. Same with Satyajit Ray. I mean,
Yes.
When there was no bounce lighting, they with Shubroto Mitro, when Pather Pachali was shot, Satyajit Ray took the light and bounced it on the ceiling, so it became bounce lighting. It's like a diffused lighting. So he
Yeah.
had that technical knowledge, or he knew how to use that technical knowledge which the cinematographer was providing.
Right.
So that is what was needed.
And that is fundamental. And let's not forget in all this, now that you name Satyajit Ray, Ritwik Ghatak as well.
Yeah,
the
brilliant.
great director from Bengal, I believe he was.
Yeah, Bengal.
So I mean, it is paramount to me. I think that film directing teaching, learning how to direct a movie in film schools today has become a commercial issue. They
Yeah.
sell you the idea that by going to film school and entering a
You'll
film,
become a filmmaker or
you
an actor or so and so. But it doesn't happen like that. It's a process. It's a huge process. You need
it's a
to delve
tremendous
your.
process. But I think that in the future, if I go back to my original source,
Yeah.
I think in the future films will be programmed fully. There will be therefore the titles of this subdivision, director, cinematographer. I think it will change and it will begin to merge slowly and become digital filmmaker.
Yeah.
Because in essence, I believe my grandchildren will not be working with film in the way in which we are today.
No.
There might not even exist cameras anymore, in the sense that we know cameras today. I mean, a great part of filmmaking today is based on CGI,
Yeah.
and I think perhaps another aspect that concerns me a lot is that I think filmmakers have divorced themselves from film theoretical aspects, and I think this is a big crisis in film
Big, big price. Big price.
because when we stop thinking and when we stop analyzing and having these discussions and conversations like we're having now about the theoretical aspects of film, like for instance, you're talking about Satyajit Ray. He was as much a theorist as he was a filmmaker. We talk about,
Exactly. Because
yeah,
I will tell you that he is one of the very few, if not the only one, who wrote extensively about filmmaking. Whether it's like our films and their films, there is a book where he talked about all the Russian filmmakers, European filmmakers, Hollywood, like John Ford, Frank Capra. He talked
yes,
about all these filmmakers, their styles, how then Lubitsch, how their style is different and how they conveyed their directing style. So
yeah,
Satyajit Ray was a film theorist also.
yes. Ritvik
So that
Gotthard was also a film theorist.
was also, but his amount of work was less, but he was a professor. In
Yes,
FTII, he used to teach. So many of
yes,
the commercial filmmakers we have in India today were actually his students.
yes. I know that.
Yeah,
I know.
yeah,
So but the point is, today we see a divorce between filmmakers and film theory,
yeah,
and where too many filmmakers have been absorbed by the industry and industrial thinking without being able to take a step back and using film theory to understand
exactly.
how filmmaking should develop itself in a time when everything is dominated by technology. So these are the concerns that I have, and I'm
What I
working
can
on
see
that.
in this context, I will tell you one thing. What I can see is people's mindset have become like the mindset of the people have become like this, that if it is working for the last 5 years or 10 years or 20 years or so, that is the way to work. But
Yeah,
unless you look at it objectively and take a step back and look at the film theory again, or the film philosophy, or the art itself, then you cannot innovate. You are doing the same mistakes, maybe in a
yeah,
different way.
yes,
So once in a while, you need to look into the theories and the aesthetics of filmmaking so that you can do new kind of filmmaking, or maybe
right,
use the technology in a better way.
right,
For
but
example, Kurosawa had a movie called Rhapsody in August. It's a very like in the later age, where Kurosawa used to use a lot of telephoto lenses. It
yes,
used to give a lot of shallow depth of field. So in one scene, he had required certain kind of like certain amount of depth, this focal length he needed, or this kind of composition he needed. So rather than changing the movement of the camera or changing the lens, what he did is he took away the mise-en-scène. From the mise-en-scène, he took away the pillars of the wood boards. Okay, so that he got one plane empty, so that he could put the camera and he could place the camera and got the shot he wanted. So that was the
yes,
thing. When Orson Welles shot Citizen Kane, he put a hole on the ground to put the
well,
camera to get the perfect perspective.
yeah, that's
So
a famous one.
that out
Yes,
of that passion, yeah.
that's a famous one. But today we are, unfortunately, we do not always have that possibility to romanticize with our with our filmmaking, because
Right.
and this is a little bit the beauty of it, because you're mentioning now a few great film directors like Kurosawa,
Right.
Satyajit Ray, Orson Welles, and so and this I think the big challenge we're facing is exactly that we are not right now in a, ideologically and aesthetically, we have moved away from this kind of thinking. I mean, today, Netflix production or HBO or
Even
Amazon, they would not allow you as a director to even do a long take, because the production codes have changed. They would not allow you even to start digging a hole on the ground to do a shot, because you're destroying production schedule.
yeah.
And I think this romanticism of filmmaking, this actually joy of making movies, not for the money, not even for the success as such, but actually for exploring the medium, for understanding humanity, what is going on inside ourselves, what is going on in the minds of others. I think this is what we have to regain, and this we can only do by also beginning to first read a little bit backwards and study what has been written by filmmakers as film theorists. Uh, Number one. Number two, by also film theorists who were not filmmakers. Some of them were exceptionally good. But principally it is by understanding the potential of what we actually are holding in our hands, which is extraordinary, because digitality is extraordinary. I mean, what is going on? I put you. We're looking at the camera right now. I'm looking into the
Right.
camera. The camera is reacting electrically,
Right.
right? Then it's sending digital information to the other side and across the globe. People can hook up, people can watch this,
Yeah.
people can, communicate through this electrical digital process, because we usually talk only about the digital aspect of it, but there is a huge amount of electrical process also involved in this
Yeah.
communication as well. I
Definitely.
mean, the light, it's not just some magical
Element
device.
in our
It is also, but it is not only that. It is also something that can be explained through scientific knowledge. Where my face produces some particles that reach the camera. The camera reacts and sends a bunch of codes across the
and
system.
also and also we need to look at the voltage, we need to look at the watt, which will
Right.
define the light. So it
Yes.
matters. Electricity is a big part.
Absolutely. And so I mean, and it is essential to discuss this aspects of filmmaking and reality, because that is what we're working with. If we forget to debate, if we forget to actually discuss, um, every aspect of digitality today in terms of filmmaking, in terms of VR, in terms of all the new media that is emerging right now, we are going to be lost in wilderness, because this is, from my point of view, totally dominated by technology only, which is at the hands of some commercial pioneers that whose main interest is to make money and not good films, and thus we stop actually. If we allow that without going farther and analyzing these components, we are not going to be able to free ourselves from the shackles of this kind of commercial technological mentality. We need to use technology and put
To
it at the
enhance the story.
service of filmmaking
Yeah.
and at the service of humanity,
At the
because
service of
filmmaking in
humanity.
that sense can be an extremely constructive and important medium.
Right. As you mentioned, that Lucasfilm is doing it, as I know. Weta Digital is doing it. Peter Jackson is doing a lot of work with Weta Digital. They are doing fascinating work with digital and mathematics and all that stuff. Pixar is doing a lot of animation and they use a lot of digital storytelling. So even in Pixar, I would say when you are using CGI like Weta or you are using Pixar, the minute changes are very important. Like when you have a hair, how you create a hair in animation, or the clothing or the
Mm.
layers of the fabric, there
Mm.
you need some algorithms, some discrete algorithms and all that stuff. There we
Right.
need a lot of higher end mathematics. But
Mm.
ultimately, when you look at the film, you look at the qualitative aspects like the storytelling, how the light is working. But behind that, when you're creating the animation, there is a lot of technological pursuit which is happening.
Right. And in that sense, it's interesting you mentioned this. You mentioned hair. And
Yeah,
this is extremely interesting because,
this is so thin. Yeah,
for instance, one of the aspects of digital filmmaking in my program, what I'm creating right now, which is first to establish the cosmology of filmmaking, of digital
okay,
filmmaking. But my objective is this cosmology to lead to a digital film practice, meaning that from the cosmology, a new training for the filmmakers of the future should become available within the next 5, 10 years.
okay,
But going back to this, in this, one of the components of this theory, digital film theory, is actually physics, mathematics, and psychophysics,
psychology.
neuroscience. Because ultimately, I mean, the films of the future, in theory, could be implanted films. You could
Yeah.
implant your own reality perception into your own brain and live with that if that is what you wish, in theory. But the point is, um, to describe this little straw of hair that you were talking about requires a tremendous amount of information.
Tremendous, tremendous.
Tremendous amount of information. And what does that say about the nature both of the world? I mean, in that sense, in that respect, digital film can also teach us much about the
Real world.
essence, yes, the
Yeah, real
essence of the
world.
world. Because
Because
the amount of information to actually create just this little straw of hair
you need
is
to know
extra.
more. Maybe you are observing things in a different way, in a new way, to create just that thin thread of hair. Or maybe
Yeah,
fard. When you're creating fard, there are this little elements of fard when you're creating.
yes,
Or the skin,
yeah,
when you're creating wrinkles on your skin, maybe you are
yeah,
observing skin in a different way. So,
yes. So, and all this to be reproduced with CGI requires not only knowledge but also tremendous amount of information, which at the same time puts digital film in touch and in dialogue with certain aspects of physics which are have been discovered and are understood today, and certain
okay.
discussions that are going on in physics, such as information, because information itself, when people think of information, they think of perhaps the internet or news, but information is a much more
Bigger.
broader and complex concept. So information in the sense that it is, some physicists believe today that information is the core aspect of the universe.
It is.
Everything is information. There is information in our DNA. There is information in our genes. The body is constantly sending information across, the amygdala and
I mean,
different.
Olympic
Yeah,
brain and all that stuff. Yeah.
exactly. So information seems to be a much profounder aspect um, of the nature of the world, and at the same time, we now in filmmaking know as filmmakers as a fact that this is also something that touches on our profession because we work with this information, we code this information to produce certain results. We
Right.
code this information to produce, I mean, in theory, this could be a digital object that is behind me. We could
It's
perfectly well
only
do that.
curves and planes, straight lines, curves and planes. in
Right.
digitally. So yeah,
So this, I think, is a central aspect of digital film theory, and in order to comprehend that, digital film theory needs to look at what is going on in physics and what is going on also in neuroscience, because neuroscience also works with certain aspects of this information and can provide us with valuable knowledge about the nature of information, which might be able to help us to understand, to grasp better uh, how we manipulate information as filmmakers.
right. And also, I will talk about geometry. Geometry plays a big part. Whether it's you
Yeah.
say composition, whether it's you say about algorithm. Two kinds of geometry I will tell you. When we are talking about the algorithm, there is a thing called discrete differential geometry, where you
Right.
have this cartan, Poincaré, and all these projections you have. So in terms of mathematics, you can use all these things to create the algorithms and all. And if you
Yes.
go to the qualitative aspects or the spiritual aspects, I would say, or metaphysical aspect, you will see that sacred geometry, which is a very big thing in Indian culture. Sacred
Mm.
geometry, which is we associate the spiritual elements with the geometrical shapes. So
Okay.
sacred geometry plays a big part. If you watch Terence Malick's movies, he uses it. Sometimes subconsciously, sometimes not. And
Yes.
Tarkovsky has also used it. But if you are composing a picture, if you are composing a frame, you are
Mm.
using this Fibonacci sequence, you are using this
Right.
golden ratio, you are
Right.
using this shape, sacred geometry. Even our ear, the shape we have in our ear, that is also having this golden ratio and this sacred geometry.
Right.
Different kinds of shapes and geometry, ratios and
Right.
proportions. So
Right.
that is also a big part. How you are composing the shots, you know?
Right. Right. That's interesting, and it's also interesting to see that the same geometry,
Yeah.
when television was invented as an analog medium, was one of the core aspects when they wanted to understand how to actually create the color image
Right.
on
Right.
television. They used Pythagoras' theorem.
Followers.
Um, so, and that is at the core of analog uh, television production. So, I mean, the Platonic solids, this traces back all the way to the Renaissance in our culture, and I'm
Right.
sure that back in the times of the Greeks, there was a great dialogue and going back and forth between the East and Greece, because Greece is not really Western. Greece is
No, it is Eastern, more like Eastern.
yes, I think Greek.
Pythagoras was inspired by Indian mathematicians, and he was
Yes,
inspired by Indian culture. So,
yes. So there has been great dialogue in that sense between this these tremendous minds that have given us geometry and mathematics, arithmetics, and other fields of study that are very important today. So, but I mean, to sum things up a little bit, for me, the important thing is I don't know if you are directing yourselves toward filmmakers or just people in general who are interested in broader culture. But to me, it is fundamental to start debating digital film from an entirely new point of view, where
right.
digital film goes into its components, into arithmetic, into physics,
Yeah.
into engineering, and use those elements which have intrinsically um, components of philosophical value and of
Absolutely. And
philosophical
I will
importance.
also say social sciences like sociology, anthropology,
Mm.
psychology,
Mm.
all these things you need to consider also.
Of course, of course. Uh, with a little bit, yes, of course, those are essential. But the reason that in my research, my particular research, I leave those a little bit outside is because I think that today we have a brilliant film theorists, at least in Europe, who are fully focused on these aspects.
Right.
Among them, my professor, the professor that is leading my research, Anna Roger Backman, she definitely has a hold on these aspects, and I think they are very important, and they will always be important. All I'm advocating for is that we do not forget the core, and that the core of film technology today is entirely different from what it was, and it
Yes.
will be entirely different in the near future from what we believe it is today. Because I think, as I said before, that film schools are teaching filmmakers, particularly film directors, they are giving them the entirely wrong tools to confront the medium. I'm not saying all film schools, of course. I will be a little careful there, but the film schools where I have worked are not doing this, and these are considered perhaps the only school where I saw a little bit of this was Beijing Film Academy, where they had
Yeah, they will do that because
grasp.
technologically they are focusing on that.
But and also I must give credit, a great credit to India, in the sense that I think that India had, in spite of this lack of, this suffering of the same problems as Europe in terms of film teaching, I think India still has this openness toward the experimental aspect
But there is
of.
a problem. There is a problem. In India, there is a big problem. Just
Huh?
like we mentioned, Eisenstein. Eisenstein is an engineer and a filmmaker. But in
Yes.
India, the culture has been like that. When you are coming from a different like a different background, there is a
Yeah.
lot of problems that comes with it. Even if you love films, you may understand films more than anyone else, but you need to show it. Otherwise, they have certain kind of paradigms within themselves.
Mm.
But India is producing great scientists. You talk
Yes.
about artificial intelligence, you
Of
talk
course.
about deep learning, you talk about machine learning, you talk
Yes.
about robotics, you talk about these mathematical things. Like they are teaching abroad now, they are going
Yeah.
outside and teaching abroad.
I know.
If we can find a way to take them back to the art and film industry and use their advice, seek their advice to see how you can enhance the storytelling using the digital techniques, and how we can enhance the aesthetics of film using those digital techniques, how you can
Mm.
make it more subtle from more gross,
Yes.
that we need to work on, because everything should
Yeah.
go together. That was the Indian culture before. So
Mm.
now you cannot place it separately.
Right.
If you understand the science enough, you can use the art in a better way, or you can express in art in a better way. But if you don't ignore
Right.
science completely, you are missing out a lot, because the future is going to be a lot digital. But you
Totally.
need to.
Totally digital. And I think India is a country with a tremendous potential, and not only potential. I mean, at the
Talent.
moment, it is leading in many areas, especially pertaining as engineering goes,
In science.
and some fundamental aspects of the development of what humanity needs. So I mean, and I also must say, I mean, I have to be very honest here that, I mean, the quality of filmmakers that I met in India is absolutely some of the highest in the world under
Yeah,
any standards.
yeah,
Um,
they are.
I
In
think
terms of thinking, in terms of philosophy, they are very high.
in every respect, I dare say, and there we might have different opinions, because when you look at Indian films with your eyes, you're looking at some certain aspects that perhaps I do not see.
Yeah,
And to
that's what.
me, I will not mention any particular film, because I know that these things can be extremely controversial in India. But I've
No, no, yeah,
watched some films that probably are considered extremely commercial there,
yeah,
that in Europe, because of the solutions that they have found, both narrative and aesthetic, would be
yes,
considered very advanced
yeah,
for our times. I think, in terms
definitely.
of aesthetics, both Indian and Chinese films, in many respects, are definitely ahead of Europe at the moment. Um, where I do see some weakness, perhaps, and I say weakness with a very, you know, not not a very important weakness, if you ask me, but still it's a small weakness, is perhaps in narrative respects, where the stories repeat themselves too much in Indian filmmaking. But 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 at the same time, if the public likes that, who am I to judge the public? Like,
Sometimes it's very forceful. The public doesn't always like that, but
hmm,
sometimes it's very forceful. But they are doing it. They are producing a lot of content. That's okay. But also, to think about the future, we need to think about the digital filmmaking as well. How we can implement science in filmmaking. That is
yeah,
one aspect, and also the indigenous Indian culture. Joseph
yeah,
Campbell was inspired by that Indian indigenous culture and Mahabharata.
yes, yes,
In the myth, the creation of the myth, he was inspired by this indigenous Indian culture. So if
yes,
you talk about Aztec, if you talk about Mayan civilization, if you talk about the ancient Indian civilization, they were far ahead of any other civilization. So we need to respect that. We need to use that in our filmmaking narratives also,
yes,
as well as we need to use the technology so that we can tell it in a grandiose way, or you can tell it in a better way.
right.
So that is what we need to work on.
Yes. Well, everybody has to work on something. In Europe, I can
Yeah.
tell you, well, I come from Chile, but I live in Europe. So in Europe, we have a lot of things to work on. And one of the things I think that we could really learn from Asian movies, Indian and Chinese, and probably Korean as well,
South
is
Korea is doing wonderful work.
is yes, definitely is actually the way in which narrative is approached aesthetically in visual terms. So I really hope that this world crisis will be soon over, and so that I can go back and to both India and Asia to replenish
So
my soul and my artistic mind, because it is there that this idea of digital film theory was born.
yeah, right, right.
So yes,
Uh,
this is
yeah,
more or less what I can tell you about my research right now here at Gothenburg University in
yeah.
Sweden. That is I think to me personally it is of extremely important value, but I think that there is also something that hopefully will inspire other people to start doing research in the same direction, to start looking at the components of film not from a technical or technological point of view, but also from a philosophical point of view, because technology and philosophy are actually closely intertwined. I mean,
Very much.
I think particularly in India, we can see that these things have been there from the beginning of the philosophical schools in India. That you know, the transformation of nature into other elements, reincarnation, and so I mean,
There are five elements, 5 elements of nature, and then number theory. India did a huge amount of work on number theory, Vedic math, and other things.
so in reality, what I'm doing is closely intertwined with the basic core of Asian and Indian culture. I'm just bringing it a little bit closer, perhaps, to the contemporary scientific thinking that is taking part in physics primarily, and also in psychophysics, and following the
Psychophysics.
work of people like Donald Hoffman and Giulio Tononi, or Max Tegmark, physicist, um, you know, uh, and so Martin Rees. Uh, so there are elements, and I think it's fascinating, and I hope. I think India, particularly India, can be a great host for this idea of digital
Yeah,
filmmaking in the
it can,
future
it
and
can.
digital film theory.
It can be. And I also have some people who are actually teaching particularly the digital aspects or the scientific aspects like artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning, game theory, game design. I know some people. Maybe we can arrange a meet with them and we can talk about the qualitative aspects and they can talk about how to implement that using that technology. And we can have
Right.
a coherent discussion where we can
That
talk
would
about
be
it.
very interesting. Yes, most definitely.
Yeah,
So
will be.
I thank you tremendously for this opportunity.
No thank required. We are great friends, and it's always good to talk to you. We learn so much from each other, and people can learn a lot from our conversation also. So I hope we can make great films in the future, and as much as we can provide, it's a great help. Yeah,
That would be lovely. I look forward to that. We will make films in the future.
we will make. Yeah. Thank you so much. It has been a
Thank you.
great session, and looking forward to the next one. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you to you too. Thank
Bye
you
bye.
kindly. Thank you.
Yeah. Bye bye.
Goodbye.